I'm with Pierce today. How are you, Pierce?
Doing well. It's a great day. Yeah, a little bit rainy in New York, but hey, it's been super cold recently, so this is fine.
I like the plants in the back, by the way. I've been
Yeah,
telling my
yeah.
wife when we need to get some plants up in here.
You got to get away from it all. So you've got kids, you got stuff to do on your still having kids over here. So I obviously these are my plant children. That's what I'd call them.
I love it. I love something about the color green and I don't know. Anyways, okay. So just as a level set, I
Mhm.
usually start with where did we meet? I guess that maybe in the last year. I think we maybe
Twitter.
connected over Twitter. Okay, there you go,
Yep.
Twitter. I think I've been aware of you and your work and all that for some time. I think we actually maybe formally connected about a year ago. And I guess just to kick it off, you're with a company, a tiny little company called TradingView, right?
Yeah, brand new startups. We're just trying to get our feet in the door. Really
Top
tough
100
market.
websites. Is that what I saw recently on Alexa?
Top 65. We're number
Whoa.
65 globally. So it's hard to find a company that's actually ranked higher in like the investing space. We're starting to get in the range of like Amazons and Apples of the world. Yeah,
So
super cool.
wow, okay, super fascinating. And you've been with this company for
Oh, almost 3 years now. So yeah, I joined 2019, and yeah, wow, it's been a long haul. It's actually pretty amazing that it's actually been as short as it has, just based on like how fast things have grown. Timing is everything, right? Like we just really good time to be in the market. So
and by the way, I want to get into the trading view story and all that
mhm.
eventually, but I want to start first with your story. And as I call this, I call it Bitcoin stories. Not every guest is obviously a Bitcoiner or in the
Mhm.
Bitcoin scene, but a lot of them tend to have some affinity towards the topic. And so I'm really curious. Some people on the show, they start their story with like their great grandparents in World War II and stuff like, which I love. Some people start with their first job. Some people start with, I don't know, 2 years ago. Where does your story start?
I think my story starts from a little tiny town in Northern California. It's called Miranda, California. You can look it up on Google. When I was there, rough population was about 300 people total. Safe to say I grew up a country boy in the middle of nowhere. And I mean, raised by a really tight knit community of super out there people, some of them who had escaped society, others who were born and raised farmers in the middle of, the wilderness, and really a village, if you will, in terms of the people that came together to build a really tight knit community. So it's always where my story starts, just because being out in the bigger world now, and obviously I live in New York, it's definitely an interesting realization that community is not something that's just constantly existing around you. You have to like actually build that and
Mm.
really surface that and curate it. And so I think that's really, what got me into a lot of different things, just because that search for community never stops. And there's communities all over the web now that have been fantastic to be a part of. I think crypto is one of them. Before my time at TradingView, I was at Stocktwits. Stocktwits was a huge community of investors, basically piling together, trying to figure out what was happening in the markets, what they should invest in, what's the best kind of way to spend their money. And it was a noble kind of ambition. I think that I'm always interested in the idea of crowdsourcing ideas and people helping each other, like really lending a helping hand. So that's driven me a lot. And no, my great grandfather came over on the Delaware in 1605. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, that's a good starting point. Yeah, but
I
I've
like that
I've
though.
done it a bunch. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say community. I think that matters, and I agree. I think because I moved out too from not a village, a smaller place where everybody knew your name, and then moved out to Toronto. Which
Yeah.
is yeah, you're right. You're like just this person that like you're like this little speck just flying
Dot
around
on the
by
bigger
yourself, and you're
picture.
like, where do I belong, and
Yeah.
how do I make sense of all this? And so I agree. And in some ways, the now with over the last year, especially, it's been so difficult. I'm a huge fan of events and doing like Bitcoin events and community
Yeah.
events, but that's almost been removed. And so
At
I
least
think,
physically. I mean, that's
yeah,
the thing.
yeah, which has really sucked. I'm not going to lie. I missed that a lot. And anyways, hopefully soon we'll get back to that world. But in the absence of it, I think online, right? Like it's magical, but like a lot of us even grew up with this, like being plugged in and being able to
Mhm.
connect with others that share a similar vision or passion that we
Mhm.
maybe don't even know, like their names of even, right? Sometimes it'll just be some AX123, some username, but they say something or they do something and you just connect with them. So I like how you connected that. Stocktwits, I never even knew you were there. So what, that
Yeah.
must have been an interesting
Yeah. Such a crazy
journey.
ride. Yeah, Howard Lindzon is the founder. I mean, he's the legend. His story is even weirder than mine, but he moved around a lot before. He was a hedge fund manager as well. And he basically had this premonition that Twitter was going to be a big deal. And he went out and tried to build basically like the Twitter of finance, which we know now is moved back to Twitter. But at the time, the idea for a curated community of X0526 guys or gals was pretty novel at the time. I actually joined, before that, I was working at Reuters and as a journalist, and Howard really had this ambition to make kind of content be developed by this huge network and then surfacing that into articles, to videos, basically using the power of the community to create the new CNBC. And that was always his thesis, was like decentralized CNBC.
And then you described your childhood, you growing up. Were you more of like a nerdy guy, like playing with computers, more outdoors?
Dude, it's funny because a lot of people think that, oh yeah, finance guy, tech bro, not really maybe a nerd, but I grew up actually playing Dungeons and Dragons from a very young age. Chaotic neutral barbarian was my go-to. And yeah, and then early days, I was playing StarCraft online as well as...
I've lost years of my life to that game. Oh my God.
You know what? So
I'm not that good, but I'm just saying I've lost years to that game.
So there was this game, Diablo 2 as well, that came out that was the first kind of multiplayer online. It was like a metaverse before metaverses existed. And you could build custom gear, share items, all this stuff. There's a huge kind of economy running in there. I was playing Diablo, I think at the time, like the first server that popped up, there were like 250 people on the server. Now today, it's safe to say, is like millions of people running on various servers all over the web. And yeah, I spent a lot of my childhood playing games. Besides that, I was running around outdoors just like every kid does. I grew up, it's actually funny, but I grew up off grid. And for those who don't know, basically our power was solar, and we had water pumps to have hydroelectric power. But we never had access to public utilities. We would actually pull water from a spring on the mountain, and that would actually come down and be filtered multiple times over and then feed into our house system. Cool. And I always had this.
Wait, how did you have internet then? Or did you have internet figured out?
Yeah, it was satellite internet. Yeah.
When
satellite internet.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. We had dial-up for, oh God, we had dial-up when I was a little kid. And then the first satellite internet, immediately my dad like purchased it right off the bat because it was our only way to really connect to the broader world at the end of the day. But I grew up without TV, all this stuff. Yeah.
How is satellite internet today? I think Elon Musk's got something, I forget what it's called, but is it because I'm not going to lie, we've toyed with the idea of going off grid. It's more just like a nice to think about type of thing, but the internet thing always gets me stumped.
It's funny because you don't even realize, but if there's like a huge rainstorm, that's it, you're done. So like the worst days where you're stuck inside, you actually just don't have access to the web. Because literally
so there will be days in the
stratosphere. Yeah, you literally can't even connect. But besides that, it was great. It worked way faster than dial-up. It's 0 to 1 in that scenario. But I've seen the Elon Musk thing too.
So where does your story take you next then? So you that's fascinating. So you're a journalist, you're kind of a techie guy coming in love with community. You've got did you stumble upon that, or was that what you set out to do in terms of journalism?
Yeah. How I got into journalism was our high school had what would you call it? At first it started just like an internal radio station. And then we partnered actually with the local broadcaster to launch the first ever radio show or news show for students. And seemed like a small deal at the time, but I got involved really deeply in the operations of how do we actually keep a cable station running 24/7? What's the programming? How do you actually fill slots with content? Who's going to manage that? And where does the content come from? It was a great project, and it really got me excited about not just the media itself, but also the business behind it. In college, I actually duplicated that and built the first television station for UC Santa, which is still alive today and actually has a substantial following, the SCTV, Santa Cruz Television. So I guess from a very young age, media has been very interesting to me. I've focused a lot on not just like the actual journalism side of things, but the actual production side of things. So the actual cultivation of content rather than the actual creating of the content itself. So safe to say, I consider myself an okay writer, but if I was to look back and think early on, which path would I really like to take? It's obvious and clear to me that I should have focused more on the business path rather than the actual writing side of things. I went to Columbia after UC Santa Cruz, and that's where you meet the best in class journalists who are working in Afghanistan, as an example, being war correspondents. And so here's this kid like out of Northern California walking in the door like, I own the place. And it was such a humbling experience to quickly realize that you're a small fish in a much bigger pond. And so it was clear that from the quality of production standpoint, I was never going to be able to compete from a pure kind of content standpoint. I definitely did. I worked at Reuters and a couple other places, but I think my passion really started to show up a lot more in the actual development side of things, the production side of things. And ultimately, all companies were the same. And he's like, no, you'll be our first New York employee. And they had a small team out in San Diego. That was where Stocktwits was originally based. And it seemed interesting, the idea of kind of this crowdsourced media, but I really did like the idea of building a business from scratch. And that's really what kicked me over the edge, more so than a specific type of media or something like that. It was the idea of being the boots on the ground, actually developing the organization rather than just cranking out articles. I don't know if you've seen the inside of a newsroom, but it is not glamorous. I'll say that. People are cranking out articles every single day. It is grueling work, super fulfilling. People that I worked at Reuters move markets every single day because they're writing on stuff that is happening in real time. And it's a super exhilarating environment, but these people it's just next level production. I can't even describe it. I think different newsrooms are maybe not as high performance, but Reuters is the largest wire around the world, more than 2,000 journalists. And so the scale of production is insane.
No, I had a tiny bit of experience on the other side of that because I've been in Bitcoin for almost 8-9 years now. We've had a lot of interviews and things with reporters over the years. And if there's one that stands out, it's like the Reuters interview, just because it was like the least amount of words that came into my mouth and the most number of like people that saw that. It was just like, wait, there are all these newspapers around the world that just literally copy, or not copy, but like just cite Reuters or whatever it is. And they're all part of this. It was pretty eye-opening for me. So, and I can only imagine what that room must, is it like a stock trading room?
like a boiler room almost.
I don't know.
But content rather than actual stock trades. Yeah, it's very similar. The floor, so the building is in Times Square, for those who haven't seen it. It's like the Thomson Reuters building, but they have offices all around the world. Yeah, and the main difference that you bring up, they are a wire versus just like a single publication producing content. Like the wire service syndicates out to thousands of publications around the world. So you get quoted by Reuters, you actually show up like in Australia or New Zealand. Every publication just picks up.
Yeah. So where does your journey take you next then, Pierce? So when were you at Stock?
Year-wise, I was there in 2013 through, oh God.
So had you brushed up on Bitcoin yet or not really?
Yeah, I actually learned about Bitcoin through Twitter, but it wasn't until much later. So I did learn about Bitcoin when I was at Stocktwits, but it was probably 2016 when things really kicked in for me. We actually had a conference every year, again, going back to your communities and real-time events. So we had a conference in New York, actually underneath the 59th Street Bridge. There's this huge event space. And I was responsible for putting that all together for whatever reason. I don't know why it was my job, but it ended up being my job. And we had a ton of speakers, all different subjects, everything from stock investing to private equity to venture capital. The keynote speech of the first day, is a 2-day event, was Fred Wilson. And Fred at the time had made an investment the year before in Coinbase. I think it was 2015. Yeah. And
by the way, but something happened today with Coinbase.
I think it's a
great day to tell this story.
Yeah. So I met Fred that day backstage, and basically he's actually good friends with Howard. So it's like a friends and family thing. But we put him on stage with Howard, and they're just going rapid fire questions, talking about everything, right? Whether it's public equities, private equities, venture, because Fred is just no bullshit. He's like the most New Yorker that you'll ever meet, and he'll just go full on. And so Howard's trying to keep up with Fred's mind, basically. And so we start talking about crypto and what's going to happen. And Fred is just flat out says, I have no idea where this is going. No idea. And he said, basically, I'm an investor because I can't afford to lose or miss out on what potentially could happen. And so he really had no idea at the time. He said, basically, I have 5% of my net worth in crypto. And I think that everybody should, as the premise, because there was just such a big, if you think about it in traditional kind of market terms, there's such a large options contract on the table where if you break even, it's whatever, it's the cost of buying an option. But the potential upside to that option is almost unlimited in the sense of what you could pay, basically get a payout if things actually worked really well. And so a risk reward scenario, it just seemed much more in favor of kind of the upside rather than the downside. And so pretty much on the spot, I think the day after the conference, I opened the Coinbase account, which at the time was, oh my God, back in 2016, it was pretty clunky. And there was like a 5-6 day ACH process. You had to send them a bunch of physical documents or something like that. It was pretty clunky, but yeah, I followed Fred's thesis, 5%. And safe to say that it was a good time to do it. I definitely sold a lot with all the mania, held on too long as well, rode out the first wave. Yeah, even before I, joined TradingView or anything like that. Exactly.
Interesting. So that was your first kind of exposure. And then what was that like in the sense that, okay, so that's a great story, by the way, around what Fred said there. Just because it is right. Like the bet is highly asymmetric. It's like worst case, you lose your capital. It's either
but what is 5%?
Exactly. Or it's, yeah. Okay. So what happens after then? What happens so for you in terms of
after the event? No, after Stocktwits, basically we went, when I was hired, we were 6 people. When I left, we were about 45. So good run, but ultimately maybe outgrowing what potentially could come of it, in a sense that there wasn't a ton of additional opportunities. And ultimately building communities takes a long time. And so you can't really force the issue. So it's very like limited upside from what the business could additionally become. And so I saw that early enough to start thinking about what else do I want to do? Are there other markets or other communities worth building? And I'd known the TradingView team for a long time. Probably for a lot of the folks that'll listen to this, they've probably met Stan or talked to somebody who worked at TradingView at some point in time, because we're pretty ubiquitous, but safe to say we don't really, have a lot of press. We don't do a lot of media. We've never bought a paid ad. We just like low key exist. And I knew about them back in 2012 when they launched in Chicago, but I really had no idea how big the business was. And so I quit Stocktwits. I really didn't know what I was going to do next. I thought I was going to go back to California. I had some ambitions around investing more in passion projects. I grew up in this kind of alternative world. So to work in trading and investing doesn't seem like naturally logical to people. And safe to say, I have a lot of passion in kind of things like sustainability and actually doing well for the world, not just well for a small percentage of investors who, actually have the capital to put to work, rather than working for people who have nothing to work with. I went down this, path of trying to figure out where can I invest my time and how can I do better? And TradingView reached out of the blue. They'd heard through other people that I'd left. And we talked about it for a long time because, I wasn't sure I want to stay in the space or double down, if you will, into fintech and trading tech. But the more I learned about the business, the more it was just obvious that there was a ton of upside. And again, asymmetric in terms of the risk profile, just because the scale of the business that these guys have built, and I'm just here to really accelerate that. But the bones, the infrastructure that they've actually built under the hood is pretty incomparable. And once I started to realize how ubiquitous they'd become in a bunch of strategic ways, I just had to make that bet and join the team shortly thereafter. Going back to the passion stuff, I'm still actually doing a lot of passion projects on the side. So it's great to be able to do both, which is what I wasn't, worried that I could do early on, but it seems that I can. Yeah.
Interesting. Hey, when you say that what they'd build under the hood was pretty incomparable, that's obvious to a lot of people. And if they don't even know it, they probably subliminally know it, because like TradingView seems to be running on every website, at least in the crypto space. But why? Well, what was it though? If you had to distill it down to 2 or 3 points, why? Like, what is it that? Why is it that companies so often say that that's such important real estate that's so valuable? Like, why is it that even the Binances of the world, why is it that all of them have this view and through TradingView?
Yeah, you cannot compete with free, and then you cannot compete with the scale of technology they built. So the tech itself obviously does a lot, but the scale of tech that they have, and then offering that for free, people, they're like brains shatter. They're like, wait, I pay like $600,000 for an enterprise contract for all this advanced charting, which is actually not even that good of charts. And they're like, you'll give this to us for free? And so all of a sudden it becomes a very easy conversation. And that really has, spurred a lot of different conversations with a lot of different folks.
Has that always been the case? Has that been part of the business model from day one?
No. And that's the thing is the initial size that they got, which is again, from retail subscriptions, that has been a focus from a revenue standpoint. And then once they built a pretty significant revenue base, they could actually afford to give away the tech. From the outset, early partners, it was enterprise sales. They really had to go door to door and say, hey, we have something really interesting. We hope that you'll use it. And to his credit, Stan and a couple of the guys really had to bang on doors for years to get something done. And as we grew, we could become more accommodative for the industry. These guys are very much thesis driven, and they really think that investing should be for everybody. But to have the tools to do that shouldn't be a huge burden. Even a couple of years ago, it was the case where to get a really advanced product, you need to pay upwards of $100 a month, if not more, simply to access the information. I think they definitely realized that was the opportunities. Can we actually break down that barrier? I think there were some options in the market, say Yahoo Finance, but I don't know, last time you ever used Yahoo Finance. That's not
Someone
great.
shared a Yahoo Finance link to the Coinbase thing today with me. So that was my first time visiting Yahoo Finance in a while. Yeah. But it's very interesting. So you've heard of the word freemium. Is this kind of what this is? It's like free until it's not, like the bigger whales or the bigger customers of yours that want more bells and whistles, they pay or something? Is that how it works? Or is it consulting, or how does it?
So we have two businesses. On the retail side of things, again, it's a individual customer subscription. And apologies for living in New York, you'll maybe hear some sirens. From the retail standpoint, we call it the 80-20 rule. So 80% of the product is free, and that last 20% is going to be a paid product. And then from the enterprise side of things, most of our tools are free. And then a small fraction of those tools are customizable, much more robust and advanced. And we only give those to partners that are paying customers over time. But so safe to say, most of what we do, we give away for as low a price point as we possibly can. And I think generally speaking, that is, again, the founder's thesis is to give much more than you take for the broader industry. So that has driven them to make things not just accommodative today, but more accommodative tomorrow. And that's the thesis over time is the bigger we get, the cheaper things get.
And what is TradingView? Maybe we should have started with that, but just so people, because I know there's a lot of new people to just a paragraph or something.
Yeah, here, let me read from this blurb.
Yeah, right.
It's really just the marketplace for data and information, and really high performance front ends so that you can visualize that information and help you make ultimately a decision. We start from beginning, which is researching a company, researching an idea, researching cryptocurrency, what have you, and providing all that, whether it's news, fundamentals data, pricing data, what have you. And then you move into the kind of actual investment side of things where you're actually managing a portfolio or actively watching positions, and we help you visualize all that. And then on the execution side of things, we actually now integrate with various brokerages directly, so you can actually trade through TradingView as well. And so we think of it as like it's an entire life cycle for an investor. You start on one side and you end up on the other side. And we do manage that for roughly 30 million monthly active users. And these guys have been doing it for 10 years now. So it's not like a overnight success story. It's just been grinding for a really long time. But the founders, the initial thesis was actually born from their previous company, which is called Multicharts. And so Multicharts was a really advanced desktop software, which again, desktop software is a thing of the past these days. They thought, we have this really advanced visualization tool. How do we productize that or make it more accessible to customers? And they decided to basically put it on the web. So the whole concept was make TradingView be the web-based version of what Multicharts was 10 years prior. And fast forward to today, they basically productized a lot of the stuff that they had been working on for almost 10 years before that. These guys are millions of years old, by the way. And so really by doing so, they basically just made it all accessible for the web. And you don't need to download advanced software. Therefore, you can have it anywhere you go, build a mobile application to go along with it. And all of a sudden, you have a pretty comprehensive experience with a very lightweight touch and no need for any kind of advanced tools. And so that's really the innovation. It's high performance tech for the web, which is not common to this day.
And when you say 30 million users, do you mean like on TradingView itself, or do you mean across all of your partner platforms? Or
no, this is tradingview.com. And
and
to
exactly,
be clear,
right?
I mean,
so if you were to look at the whole universe of, I'm just saying, UnoCoin has 2 million users type of deal. And we're probably one of the smallest customers you have. But what does that universe look like?
In terms of, so obviously with UnoCoin and with a lot of our partners, whether it's Binance or what have you, they use our tech, but on their servers. So we don't know how big they are. That data doesn't flow back to us. We wouldn't be able to say. But we do have a bunch of web widgets and products like that are used across the financial ecosystem. And we track that pretty regularly. And we have something close to 8,500 websites that use our use our web widgets. And those are only the public sites. So then there's private sites as well, which is roughly 4,000 or so more. Yeah, in terms of the total addressable, like the number of people that see TradingView charts at any given day, it's in the billions.
Wow, that is something. Oh, okay. So I guess I was gonna ask you, what's your kind of title at GM? And so how has that journey been for you in kind of this larger backdrop of TradingView and this rocket ship of a company and whatnot? Yeah, how's your journey been there?
You got to be a quick learner, I'll tell you that. But it's funny because actually my journalistic experience didn't initially seem to me a competitive advantage if you are actually running a business. But I'll tell you, learning fast is probably the best advantage that I can bring to the table in terms of seeing that something new is happening, quickly realizing what the addressable market is for that, and then actually making that actionable on our product side. And doing that kind of as a service for the larger brand is what I do. I work on the product side of things. I work on the business side of things. I manage our global business team actually, and they fall under kind of my responsibility. But it's more or less, I call it like the global janitor for TradingView is picking up all the pieces that I really need to operationalize so that things move efficiently, fast, and at scale. And
are you allowed to share how big your team is, like what the headcount is over at TradingView, or do you guys keep that? I know some companies maybe don't.
That's interesting. I don't know why people would want to keep that private. Maybe because they may be on the other side of it where they're trying to seem bigger than they are. We have about 350 employees today.
Globally, and most of them are in New York, you said, or they're all over?
No, so the headquarters, it's a funny story. So the TradingView started in Chicago. They actually moved the headquarters down to Worthington, Ohio, because it was actually cheaper than living in Chicago. So they did Techstars. And then after Techstars, they raised a little funding, moved down to Worthington, and that's where they operated. They drive back and forth to Chicago for, business development and early partnerships and all that. But the initial traction that TradingView really got was in the FX space. And so FX is all in Europe. And a lot of these FX providers really wanted advanced front-end tools. And it was obvious that TradingView was going to be the best solution, really high performance chart. The founder decided to move back to London because that's much easier to work, locally with businesses in UK and greater Europe. And that's where our headquarters is today. So here in New York, I manage our partnerships team and a lot of the marketing efforts, but our headquarters is in London now, and that's where we have the majority of the team.
And what percentage of crypto is your business? Is it like a fraction of the TradingView universe? I mean, you guys are in Forex, and there's just so many different things you guys cover that I'm just curious, or has it become more important over the years?
It's funny, right? So there's different kind of curves of adoption. So if I look at FX being the first adopters, because we just had such a global demand for really high performance FX data, that curve probably 2014, 2015, and really saw that initial pop. Equities has been pretty, how would you call that? More methodical. It really hasn't had the same kind of spikiness that other asset classes have. But safe to say, it's grown a lot over the years and continues to grow pretty fast today. 2015 was the first time we saw crypto really come to the foreground at TradingView. And I actually looked at it the other day, and for a different reason, someone was trying to say that TradingView was late to the crypto sphere. The first data feed that they actually pulled in was from Mt. Gox in 2013. It was the first data feed that they had found on the financial web, and they grabbed the endpoint and basically put it into their charts. And at the time, people thought, this is weird. What is TradingView doing in crypto when they're like an FX and equities platform? We now integrate 30 plus crypto exchanges and have all their data locally on TradingView. We did see another massive uptick in 2017. And then the most recent bull run, pretty much all of 2020, actually, we've just had pretty substantial growth every month, every week, really. It's been insane to watch. So crypto is now almost 30% of our total business. And that's really from only a couple of years ago, they were less than 5%.
Wow. Wow, that's insane.
Yep.
So we alluded to it earlier. Probably we're saying though that Coinbase public today had their IPO today. So hey, you got to admit, pay credit where credit's due. People talk smack about Coinbase, but Brian is a pioneer, and I'd be lying if I said that even our efforts in India weren't partially inspired by his work. And so he really paved the way for, I think, an army of entrepreneurs around the world, and to do it in some ways ground zero in the United States is kudos. So I think, like I said, I think in some ways everyone competes and this and that, but ultimately this is a win for crypto, a win for Bitcoin, a massive win for Coinbase.
Somebody has to forge the path. There will be tons of people that will follow through and make it better, but safe to say that Coinbase is a path forger. And you got to respect them for that, because they're going into uncharted territory and not just casually stepping into it, but just very aggressively pushing the envelope. There's nothing you can't respect about that. At the same time, I think you guys are doing things that are super interesting for different markets, and nobody's doing that as well. So you're also forging paths. And we talked previously about your run-ins over there and how that's been going. So it's been, in that sense, you got to really respect the companies that are pushing the envelope a lot. And today it's really I think a validation of that effort, or separating the companies that simply follow into a space because it's interesting. Coinbase being the first to get out the door, in my opinion, is actually the best way, because it really does validate the sense that strong doers will be paid for their actual results. And yeah, it's an incredible day.
And it's not just this, but it's also, I think if you look at the Tesla news from whatever, a month ago or a couple of weeks ago, when they announced that they're going to be holding Bitcoin in their reserves or whatever it is. And these are not just little things. These are big companies. And isn't Elon the most wealthiest man on earth? And who doesn't know that name now? And in some ways, it feels like we're turning a corner. We're going from being like those weird people on the internet to perhaps having a bit more grounding there. Okay, so anything else you want to share? So we talked about your story. And by the way, I was going to ask you one more thing about community. So in building TradingView, top 65 websites in the world, and I think most people would dream to be a part of a project like that. So what did, because like I said, I love events. So I love the podcasts, and I believe the community building is, and you talked about that at the beginning, kind of about the podcast. So how has that played into the way you've seen business development and the work that you do?
Yeah, and I think it makes everything easier. In a way, community is, in every capacity of life, people strive towards community. It's, built into our nature just by being tribal, going back to the caveman days. Building community is not something that you even do, I guess, consciously. You're just constantly building connections as the nature of, I guess, survival at the end of the day. Building community inside of companies is definitely different, in the sense that there are key hooks, key levers, key drivers that ultimately kick off value from a product set. And that's been really interesting to build that. At Stocktwits, we were fumbling around in the dark to figuring out what kind of mechanics actually build community. You can always just have a network, but really the big difference is making sure that they are constantly engaged and constantly re-engaging on a product. Stocktwits' business is an ad model business, so it's a bit different than TradingView, because the ad model really needs you to engage every single day. Whereas TradingView is a subscription business, our actual value is the deepness of the product, not so much the high rate of engagement. We don't care if you come back 60 times a day. We care that you're coming back consistently and engaging, but we don't need you to be dedicated and on the platform every single day. It's safe to say people spend, upwards of 10 to 12 hours a day just looking at charts, but it's not like our core business model. And what's interesting about that is that it changes the dynamics, because Stocktwits always wanted to focus on really real-time chatter and chat and being so engaged. TradingView actually actively encourages people to slow down and to take a deeper look before making a move or making a new investment. And long-term investing, I think, is something that we've seen time and time again as being who's calling? No idea.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm back. My mom called. No, I love her. She's great. Probably should have put my phone on silent. I thought it was. Anyways, maybe she's on the cannot silent mode. But anyway, so dude, this has been fascinating. Hey, okay, we know one of my. Was there anything else you wanted to share? I guess on your story or the TradingView story? I could keep going forever, but I know you're super busy and stuff. So I wanted to shift gears to the last couple of questions here. But anything else you want to share on the? Yeah, and like the journey and your personal journey and all of this in terms of TradingView?
No, I think overall, like I said, it's been a great story thus far. And I definitely am interested in seeing what happens next. Again, Coinbase, from our perspective, is really just day one in a lot of ways. I think there's a lot to continue to build. And we actually are getting a lot into DeFi and a lot of the NFT space as well. And a lot of that will be coming up soon. Definitely great to come back and talk about it in the future.
So just on this note, so I'll pause here for a second. So technically Coinbase Coinbase is going to be this like
Yep.
stock that trades that I assume will be listed or is already
Listed
listed on
on TradingView.
TradingView, right?
It's on.
Somewhere.
I've been watching
And
it all
so
day on
is
TradingView. Yeah.
and so is Binance, right? BNB, is it not? Or is that not, that's listed there as well, right?
We list Binance as well. Yeah. Yeah. And
You
you can
do, right?
overlay them on top of each other. You could look at the comparison in price over a given
So
day, a
so
given
Pierce,
hour.
any thoughts or any comments on the, I guess the with the no, not the performance, but the alternate route? Like, for example, Coinbase has been at it for 9 years now. The Silicon Valley darling child, I guess you could say, IPO, really like that, like doesn't get, but Binance came out of nowhere 3-4 years ago. What was it that they did their ICO? ICOs in general have a bit of a bad rep, yet they rose in the midst of that. I think most people in the space have a Binance wallet or an account. They're killing it, let's just face it. But any thoughts on that kind of dichotomy? How, I don't know, just like how the two worlds are now on TradingView.
And
those two stories literally beside each other, right?
In real time. Well, it's so interesting to see all those coins in real time. And it's funny, but nobody really talks about, a lot of people talk about, but comparable, but FTX is catching up really fast as well. The amount of hustle that is put in over there is, again, much like Coinbase, the level of execution that they're firing at is hard to compare. Safe to say, what are we? The total market cap is 2.5 trillion or something like that for all cryptos these days, supported by a handful of exchanges around the world. Even if we look at the 1990s and the initial stock boom around the world, there were hundreds of brokerages and exchanges. We've consolidated down because prices have obviously consolidated, which is obvious. It's going to happen. But before that happens, I think the market is still going to expand a lot. So I think Binance and Coinbase, will continue to be massive players. FTX catching up so quickly is really compelling. And, I'm really excited for all of them. It's safe to say they're all partners, so I can't say bad about anybody.
Yeah. I just love it, man. It's almost like, it's almost hard to believe that we live in this world. Like 10 years, 8 years ago, I wouldn't have imagined. But think about what's going to happen 10 years from now. It's going to be wild. Okay. Oh, okay. So my next question is what's one thing that you believe to be true that most others in, let's say, Bitcoin would disagree?
Smaller is better. I think that while we have had these IPOs in public markets and all that stuff, I think fractionalization of crypto is something that I actually do support. And what I mean by that is everybody, I guess, thinks that Bitcoin, but I'm actually a big fan of Rails for various kind of use cases. And I think whether it's the NFT space or a lot of the alternative world, people are really building interesting projects for very interesting use cases. And I think in the initial ICO boom, everybody said they had a use case, and that obviously wasn't really true. I think in any Gartner hype cycle, you have the initial kind of pop to the all-time highs, and then that crashes and comes tumbling down. But I really do think that small is better, because really, if I create a custom contract or chain or what have you that services a very niche community, I think that's in the long-term benefit of those small communities. And I do worry that we think too mass scale or too mass market, which is great from an investment perspective, but I do the fractionalization or the fractionalizing of an asset class to tons of other asset classes. So we have Bitcoin dominance charts on TradingView, and I'm always watching it just to see if that thesis is true. Safe to say Bitcoin remains dominant and much more dominant than I would have anticipated, but I'm still bullish on kind of this idea of moving into more niche asset classes over time.
And how do you even decipher the SNR on that, like the signal to noise ratio, in the sense that there is a lot of, as soon as you move out of Bitcoin, there's obviously a lot of noise, and there's a lot of
tons,
like straight up just people trying to scam you. It's like a minefield.
So scam artists,
so how do you tell, okay, this community, even though it's serving a smaller one, they need this token, and it's not just a bunch of people trying to run away with your money. They got some real goods behind this. Do you have some litmus tests that you run on it? You guys are in the middle of all of it.
Yeah. So we have to run litmus tests because we don't want to be, a marketplace for really terrible stuff. To be fair,
I'm sure it's very long, but if you had to,
you really got to look at traditional metrics, which is things like hash rates, actual kind of code that's being committed to a project, number of people that are actually developing a project. And then really use case, that's the biggest thing is there actual use behind this, that you look for key players, you look for people who actually can make this thing come to life, or is it really just a dream? A lot of people have dreams, but execution is everything. So it comes down to team and adoption and really traffic. Projects that have a ton of traffic usually indicate that there's a lot of mass interest, and mass interest is an indicator for long-term success, I think.
Interesting. That was great. That was great. Hey, I think those covers most of my like Bitcoin stuff. We can go on about There's so much stuff happening, right?
Yeah,
But I do like to ask two tangential questions as well.
Mm-hmm.
My first one is around AI. Is this a topic that at all interests you? Is it something that is, just curious. And I know the word AI is loaded in the sense that it could be like things that are available today that you can use for your business versus like the Terminator AI, but just curious, if I don't put too much of a filter on it, like what's your relationship with this other slightly parallel but potentially overlapping in the future world of
those of us who don't use robots or artificial intelligence in some way today are more or less missing out. It's amazing to me how I guess people don't understand what AI really means, in the sense that, does it mean that there's a robot that's just going to take my entire life and control everything? From my perspective, AI is actually very, very tactical projects that help you on a day-to-day basis. So we have neural nets that run across TradingView to identify things like scammers or spamming bots, basically identifying very strange and interesting trends that are happening across the product, and surfacing that to our moderation team before they even have to find that content or that information that's being shared across the platform. In my times at Stocktwits too, we did a lot of similar stuff, because you have to keep information not just clear but truthful, and make sure that people aren't bad actors and scammers. That is an example of AI that's being used day to day in practical terms. So if you really break down what AI is, you realize that on a day-to-day basis it's very helpful. And for the most part, these are very specific engines that are being trained to do very specific tasks. There's no way that some of my neural nets on TradingView are going to jump out of the server and become an autonomous bot and take over the world. And I don't know how people get to those conclusions, but they definitely do. AI long-term, I definitely don't think even has the capability in the next 100 years to become autonomous to do things like that. Unfortunately, robots still very much need to be trained, and they're trained in very specific tasks. So there's no kind of universal AI. There's a bunch of very small AIs that help in a human story, but ultimately they need the human to do the training. And even the guys at the Google project, the DeepMind, which has trained robots to do insane tasks at insane speed and beat the most advanced gamers and thinkers in the world in various tasks. But again, the rules of the game have to be set. So they're very narrow applications of what AI can actually do for us. So I'm very bullish, because anything that can make my life easier is net positive for me personally, whether it's my Roomba or neural nets. So
or the car that drives itself or whatever. And nowadays it definitely seems like it's moving in the direction of helping humanity. I do wonder though, like even in these narrow band scenarios, have you seen GPT-3, for example? It's pretty wild, right? Like some of the applications, like they're talking about building now applications where it can program for you. For example, you just talk to it in natural language and it whips up an app, or like legal documents, like being able to sift through like millions of pages of legal jargon and give you like a nice, easy explanation in like normal language, what it means, or journalism for that matter, or like just writing. I saw, I can't say his name, Marzon, or this like a Bitcoin guy. He had this blog post that I was reading about GPT-3 and how GPT-3 was the next big thing after Bitcoin. It was this beautiful blog about how he used GPT-3 on Bitcoin Talk, which was one of the early forums, and he started creating like certain texts, and people started responding, and it was like and it was very successful. And you read this whole blog post, and then at the end of it is, by the way, this blog post was written by GPT-3. I was like, oh, you just took me down this whole like mental maze of like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And this whole thing was written by AI.
A bot.
So I do wonder. I'm not worried that it's going to replace humanity. Like even car driving, right? Like how many people drive for a living? If cars start driving themselves.
Oh, very much. Very much. Like, that's the thing. I think that
they'll become traders.
Yeah. Why drive a semi if you could be in the back seat trading, right?
Right. No, but I do worry. It's a little bit further out, so who knows? And then universal basic income. This has become a bit of a cringe topic amongst Bitcoiners. And I think
that's interesting.
Or maybe not, but at least when I bring it up,
Huh.
I'm on episode almost 100 now, and it's a cliche topic. Like I
Mhm.
almost don't even bring it up on all conversations, but
Hmm.
it is a topic. Again, having like, I grew up in Canada, but I visited India almost every year growing up, and
Mhm.
seeing like the kind of level of poverty, at least in some places in India, like Calcutta, or whatever, we see a lot of this. There's got to be a better solution. Like that kid that was born yesterday, there's got to be something, right? But I also don't agree with the idea of, oh, let's just print money out of existence and tax people and take it from this guy and give it to this guy. But then in the absence of that, I do wonder, is there a world where maybe a crypto-based solution that, I don't know, just saying this makes me like cringe, but I do wonder, is there a way where you could take somehow maybe a percentage of the profits and systematically have it available as like an Ubi? So it's not like a tax per se, but it was something that people could maybe opt into. I don't know. Actually, there is a project. Yeah. Sorry. So go ahead.
Yeah. It's an interesting idea. And generally speaking, I think that one thing that I think the UBI crowd has been thinking about more recently, which is nuance rather than just sending checks, because I agree with you that sending checks doesn't really solve anything. But what I think a lot of people have started to focus on is the idea of universal basic investing, where, even from birth, you are given a certain allocation in an investment that is more or less locked, if we're thinking about it in those terms. And once you actually get to a certain age bracket, you can unlock parts of that investment. What the investment is, I think, is much less important than the idea of investing, period. And the concept that you could build understanding in equity and having equity over time. Because I actually don't think that investing has to apply to a specific market. I think the principle of investing is having a long-term view on things and understanding that plan for today so that you can actually have a successful tomorrow. And so I think moving past the idea of sending checks to more kind of nuanced conversations about how a child can be set up with $1,000 when they're born, and how that $1,000 can actually evolve over time. And if they graduate from high school, they actually have something that they can, afford to put not a down payment on a house. I'm not trying to give everybody millions of dollars, but the concept of enough to make ends meet, but having a kind of an intuition about the value of that money over time and giving that to people as early as possible. It's safe to say I went to a very small school, public school, and we didn't learn about investing anywhere through high school or college. I only found investing through my own interest. And so imagine knowing that from a very young age. I think a lot of my behavior would have changed, but it just wasn't in the curriculum at the time.
I mean, investing 100%, and then even money. Like, when did some teacher or some parent sit you down and be like, let me teach you about like this thing that we all are slaving over, getting into wars over, divorces over, you know what I mean? Like this thing that your school all your whole life, and then you wake up in the morning, go to bed late at night, stressing. Like, what is
I think
this
a lot of
thing?
teachers
like,
would say it's
just,
like, yeah,
just
above their pay
explain
grade.
this damn thing. And we're just thrown into the world, and it's just, yeah, figure it out. Bitcoin, where this all kind of started, I think helps you, or not helps you, but I think if it even gets you to ask the question around what is money, and which then is, followed by, well, okay, if you know what money is, and well, what is investing, and what are all these other things? Like, I find like most people don't even know what money is. I used to be a financial advisor like a long time ago, and I sat in like front of hundreds of families, and it was pretty startling to me to learn that 95% of people they're living desperate lives and the funny thing is that people can't even talk about it. Money's the topic that you don't talk about it at a family dinner, or you don't, but everyone's just like trying to figure it out on their own. No one's been taught anything about it. What is inflation? And even as a financial advisor, I felt most of the time more lost than I did at the beginning of that journey, because you just had all these like fancy suits on, use all these big words and calculators, but you're just like, wait, what is inflation really? I just take it into the equation, but what is it? How come no one explains this shit to us? And so that's anyways, but okay, dude, this has been awesome, Pierce, man. I'm so happy for you and for the whole journey. This has been, it's been fantastic. We'll have you on whenever you want again for another follow-up to shoot the shit. We'll talk about some other stuff. But anything you want to share in closing? I guess it's tradingview.com. That's the obvious one, but you have like I don't know, anything else you want to to share in terms
No,
of?
no, no. Nothing else to show. Nothing else to show.
Nothing else to show.
No, just me. Feel free to find me on Twitter. That's pretty much where I chat with everybody. But no, it's been great. It's been a pleasure. And it's always cool to talk about initial stories and how people got involved, because I think in a lot of cases, there are folks that equally are looking for their path and how to find it and what to be passionate about. And helping people understand various roads that got people into crypto or even into investing in general is great. So
yeah, man,
thanks to put it together. It's
yeah,
cool.
this has been a fun journey too, because so that's the whole thing is today all-time high. But if I was talking about all-time highs, it would get boring. And so that's the whole thing is I'm trying to encourage people to be like, hey, not only can you like get wealthy off of this stuff, you can actually build a life out of this stuff. You can build a career. You can actually do whatever you want. Like this podcast is an example of that. I literally don't even know why I'm doing it. I'm just doing it because it's fun. Anyways, dude, this has been awesome, Pierce. Be safe. Yeah. You can just hang out maybe for 2 seconds. I'm going to pause this interview. All right.